The Marlins make a trade on opening day eve, adding another potential bullpen arm to the organization. Where there's also Miguel Rojas answering back to Jazz Chisholm's appearance on the Pivot podcast. Miggy Rowe answers back and effectively confirms everything that Jazz said. Equally, there are some bold predictions from your good self just as the season's about to get cooking. This is Locked On Marlins.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings from England and welcome to Locked On Marlins. It's your daily Marlins podcast. I'm your host, Peter Pratt. Hit me up, of course, at Miami Marlins _UK. Extra long today. It's opening day eve. It's Wednesday, the 27th of March. Thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day. Of course, this is your team every day. There is a YouTube channel as well, guys. Make sure you head on over there. Hit subscribe too. The YouTube channel is also called Locked On Marlins. Easy to find and easy to subscribe. Easy to join in the comments too. Get yourself in there. Let me know your thoughts, feelings on this episode, particularly the latter part of this episode. There's going to be some bold predictions, and they are specifically related to players and some player props. So I'm going to fire out at least 5 of those in the final segment. Let me know yours as well. Really interested to know how you guys are feeling about some of these, equally what you've got in your minds as well. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. You can download the Gametime app, you can create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. All right, guys, let's start with the breaking news. I wouldn't say this is quite emergency podcast territory. I think that would probably be overselling it a touch, but the Marlins have made a trade, and they have added an arm to the organization. Well, there's a couple of bits here. The first news, let's start with the first news. Huascar Brazoban is headed to the restricted list. He has been having some visa issues and hasn't been able to get himself back into the U.S. from the Dominican. Craig Mish reporting today that those issues are linked to identity/age challenges. So maybe there's some dodgy birth certificates going on with Brazoban. Maybe he's actually 45. Maybe he's just 16. I mean, who knows? But nevertheless, he's going to need some extra time to sort this out. So that's the first news. The Marlins then have swung a trade, and they have acquired a guy called Birch Smith from the Tampa Bay Rays. Surprise, surprise, I know. Absolutely. I mean, Bendix has just pilfered the Rays. If the Rays want to ditch someone, then the Marlins are interested, which I think is a really interesting approach. Effectively, we're scooping up all the Rays cast-offs. Will it work? Who knows? It's fair to say, Birch Smith, let me just start there with the name itself. I've never heard of Birch Smith. He has been in the big leagues prior for many years, it seems, and it was more recently, I think, been pitching in Korea, perhaps. Nevertheless, Birch. Let me just start there. For any UK listeners, I've never heard any forename, any first name being Birch. Is this an American name? I've never heard anyone called Birch before. If you've got a relative, a friend, an acquaintance, anything called Birch, let me know. I've never heard this before. This name sounds truly made up. It sounds truly made up. Birch Smith. Is it short for something? Birchall? Is it Birchall Smith? That feels, I don't know. There's probably a few people listening going, hey, my name's Birch. I mean, what's Pete going on about? This is just a cultural thing, guys. I've never heard the name Birch in the UK. If it's commonplace in the US, fair play. Nevertheless, the Marlins have acquired Birch Smith. He has been added to the 40-man roster. He does have a minor league option, so it's not that he will specifically make this roster, the opening day roster anyway, the 26-man. So we'll wait to see on that one. And frankly, considering his performance in spring, he should absolutely be nowhere near the opening roster. He had over an 8 ERA in spring. It hasn't been good. Only a handful of appearances. So, if we were purely looking at spring stats, then Tanner Scott would also be no longer with the organization. So pinch of salt on the stats. Nevertheless, the Marlins have added another arm. They needed to. It's a 40-man arm, though, which is interesting. And wait to see. The roster, is still shaping up. What we have heard as well is Declan Cronin has made the team, as reported today. Talked about it on Monday's episode with my bullpen projections that I felt that Cronin would make the team. He is going to make the team. That leaves two obvious spots available. My sense is that Brian Hoeing absolutely deserves to make this team. Anthony Maldonado, I think, is a really interesting wild card as well and could absolutely impact the bullpen in a positive way. So wait to see how this bullpen shapes up. We're getting more information, but the Marlins have made a trade and they've added in Birch Smith. This is a really interesting time for someone like Peter Bendix, for organizations like the Marlins that, as guys don't make other rosters that in other areas could be stronger, this gives opportunities for Peter Bendix. So I'm expecting him to keep cooking. Like, these roster moves could continue to happen like the next couple of days. Like, why not? If guys are DFA'd, if guys are released, they haven't made the team, it creates maybe opportunities for the Marlins. As I kind of look across the roster, like, it's hard to see obvious opportunities here other than maybe in the bullpen, which I think is the most obvious one. But nevertheless, Birch Smith acquired from the Rays cash considerations. We're expecting that to be a low cash amount, let's say, from that one. So let's get into, or bring, I guess, cover the Miguel Rojas episode on the Rose rotation. Firstly, when Jazz went on the pivot pod and went pretty in depth with some of the stuff that he'd been experiencing in the Marlins clubhouse, one of the things that was called out on that was, we'll wait to see. Well, Craig Mish talked about it with the guys on Unfiltered to say, wait to see if there's any response from Miguel Rojas or maybe Jesus Aguilar. Those guys weren't named, by the way. It was just implied that the captain, clearly we can make those assumptions of who that was, the Miguel Rojas, and the big first baseman that's clearly like Miggy Rowe's friend is clearly Jesus Aguilar. Some people were getting confused thinking, is that Garrett Cooper? Absolutely not. It isn't. It's Jesus Aguilar and Miguel Rojas. The funny thing is, too, if you go back and look a year ago, Danny Rodriguez spoke about it. He mentioned these by name. Miggy Rowe, Jesus Aguilar, Anthony Bass. Those three, the three old vets, making sure that the clubhouse is policed, let's say. Anyway, Miggy Rowe joins the Rose rotation, and we're going to talk about that. Actually, I'm going to hit the first ad because I really want to get into this topic. And then after the second ad, we're going to talk about bold predictions for the 2024 Marlins. So before we do that, this episode is brought to you by our good friends over at PrizePicks. All right, PrizePicks in the house. So let's get it going here. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch those winnings roll in, baby. Football season may be over, but the action on the floor is heating up as well. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of the year. Get in on the excitement with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your... Completely lost that then. Where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. Boy, oh boy. And you can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks. With as little as 4 correct picks, you can turn $10 into 1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Yes, sir. So all you have to do is download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB. That is all in lowercase. So LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, guys, welcome back to Locked On Marlins on Wednesday, the 27th of March. It is opening day eve. How you feeling? This feels like it has been a long offseason, really long. I counted up the episodes that I have produced and published since the Marlins exited the postseason Before this episode, it stood at 94. 94 episodes talking about the Marlins and the offseason moves that they were going to make, that they could make, that they maybe should make. In the end, they signed Tim Anderson for $5 million. And that was it. Could have just done one episode. Anyway, it's been great to have you along all off season. Thanks for everyone for all the engagement, all the fun. And you listen, the fun's just about to start. And the time for talking is going to be over, to be honest. Like, we spoke a lot about this club, you know, what they could do, what they should do, what they aren't doing, what the front office is doing, all these conversations. It's time to just see what happens on the field. And frankly, that's kind of where I get the sense, like, the Marlins right now, they're just in a wait and see, mold. Let's see what happens, and then we'll kind of pivot accordingly. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting for sure. Let's talk about Miguel Rojas, though, and his appearance on the Rose rotation. So, firstly, I tip my cap to Miggy Rowe on getting into this topic. He could have clearly decided not to get into this topic whatsoever. So, I tip my cap to Miguel Rojas for that. This, for me, was expected, by the way. You know, Miggy Rowe is part of the Rose rotation. And, you know, considering what Jazz shared about Miguel Rojas, and considering he's on this podcast, naturally, Chris Rose would likely get into this at some point with Miguel Rojas. And so, yep, it was expected, but I'm pleased that Miggy Rowe did it. And it felt necessary in some ways for Miggy to try to answer some of the criticism that the Jazz leveled towards him, and maybe dispel some of the myths that were shared. You know, is it all true? How much elaboration has there been? Etc., etc. So I tried to sum it up on Twitter. Yesterday, after I listened to the episode, I was kind of like up early. I mean, UK time anyway. The episode dropped pretty early, so that was great. I got to kind of really dig into it. And, you know, the key elements that came out to me, I summarized them as best I could on Twitter, which was to say, Miguel Rojas' first... Well, hold on. Before we get into this, the way that the actual conversation went was pretty funny, where Rosie asked Miggy about this Jazz, this Jazz podcast, and, you know, the comments that he made. And Miggy gave like what felt like a very like corporate response and tried to like play it with a straight bat, play it down the line, corporate response. I'm not looking to create any drama. I'm just going to be very kind of matter of fact about things, and then we'll move on. That's how it started. That's how Miggy started. Then Chris Rose, being the pro's pro that he is, you know, he dug into a few of the specific topics that Jazz called out. And unfortunately for Miggy, that's kind of where the corporate mask slipped, and you then started to get his actual opinions and thoughts and confirmation, actually, of a lot what Jazz was saying within his podcast appearance. So I again tip my cap to Chris Rose on digging into it further with Miggy, because he gave a very straight bat response. He dug into it, and then you got a bit more out of it. The main headlines and takeaways were that overall, Miguel Rojas' view is that things like this should remain in the clubhouse. It's, you know, what happens in the clubhouse stays in the clubhouse type of vibe. That's the main point that he wanted to call out early on with Jazz going out there. And I can absolutely see that, where there's like maybe another unwritten rule. I mean, how many unwritten rules has baseball got? But, you know, unwritten rules, you can't talk about what happens. I think in general in life at this point, the just suffering in silence is, you know, we're not in that stage really in team culture, in business culture, in fact, like in anything, like suffering in silence. Like, we're kind of past that now. We've moved on. So I understand where Miggy's coming at. And this is kind of at the heart of things, really, with Miggy Rowe, where his mentality, his approach, his leadership style, the culture he creates is all about, this is how we've always done it. That's kind of his approach. And frankly, the world's moved on, to be honest. And maybe, you know, that's, you know, he's looked up to others. He's learned his style. He mentioned Martin Prado specifically. maybe that's how Martin Prado run things. And so Miggy thought, I'm going to run things like that too. But the game's moved on. Player personalities have moved on. Social media's moved on. Like, tons has moved on in that period. And so for me, yes, I understand where Miggy's coming from. He's disappointed. Fundamentally, Miggy Rowe is disappointed that this isn't kept in the clubhouse. He thinks that things should be kept in the clubhouse. And he's disappointed because, again, at the other heart of this is, Miggy doesn't want his name associated to that. And that was the other point that I made. He's upset that his name is associated with this generally. Like, Miguel Rojas has been a great shortstop. Great shortstop. A great defensive shortstop. Like, you can't knock that. And he was a starting shortstop for the Marlins for many years during a time when the team was terrible. And he got his opportunity to play every day. He was traded to the Dodgers as a backup. He then had to play every day because injuries kicked in. And this year, again, it's looking like he's going to be a backup. But overall, Miguel Rojas is proud of his career, rightly so. And he's proud of what he's done in the game. And he doesn't want his name associated to these types of things. And I completely get that, by the way. So the other thing that Miggy Rowe called out, which I thought was really interesting, was Jazz is making excuses for poor performance. So all of these things about the culture, the bullying, etc., Miguel Rojas' view is that Jazz wasn't getting to the levels that he wanted to, and thus he's just making excuses for poor performance. I'm slightly paraphrasing on that, but that was my main takeaway in that area, which I think, again, is interesting. Listen, Jazz hasn't hit. He hasn't hit the ceiling yet. He hasn't got to the level yet that he believes he can. It's primarily linked to the fact that he hasn't been able to stay on the field. I think if you piece together Jazz's body of work when he's on the field, then clearly we're talking about an elite level major league player. He just has to stay on the field. Obviously, Jazz knows that. Miggy knows it. I know that. Everyone knows that. But fundamentally, Miggy was suggesting that Jazz was making excuses for his own performance, not getting to where he wants to be, which is interesting. Then you get into this is the way it's done methodology. And he called out there are house rules. Those rules are set by the organization. The organization has rules. They aren't Miguel Rojas' rules as El Capitan. There are house rules. The Marlins have rules, and someone will hold you accountable to those rules. And that will likely be the veterans, because that's just their role. They're there to potentially shape and guide, etc. But fundamentally, you will be held accountable if you aren't abiding to those rules. Clearly, that was a friction point. Clearly, because, a lot of the friction ended up around what's Jazz wearing to games? Why is he wearing trainers rather than, I call them shoes, but like dress shoes is probably the US translation. Why is he able to do that? Is he bending the rules? And you then end up in a situation where, you end up having these arguments about what color Jazz's hair is, what he's wearing, what shoes has he got on, why is he allowed to get away with this, etc., etc. So someone will hold you accountable, and Jazz, I think it's fair to say, probably did push the boundaries. Like, I think when we listen to how Jazz speaks and the fact that Derek Jeter was making these recommendations, Jazz, this is how you need to act. This is how you need to do it. Well, I can't do that. I can't do that. So Jazz has definitely got to take some ownership of this for sure. He's a young dude in an environment that clearly he found challenging, and the way that the way his teammates were operating around him just exacerbated the issue. It added on to it. It was more fuel to the fire, where Jazz was struggling. He needed something, and it wasn't what Miguel Rojas and Jesus Aguilar were giving him, which was to be cutting up his shoes and throw them in the bin and whatever. Like, Jazz is a superstar, and he knows that, and he needs to be managed in a certain way. Nevertheless, Miggy Rowe calling out, Jazz is not the first rookie to get this treatment. This is how the rookies have always had it. This is how we've always done it, because that's how it works in clubhouses. Young guys come up, they're taught how to play the game by the old vets, the house rules, someone will hold you accountable. Not too much fun. Don't make it too hard on yourself. Just go out there, be a professional, and it's a professional environment, etc., etc. He did say that there was no kind of, the fun police or whatever. There's none of that. But it does kind of feel that way, to be honest with you, where, don't be out there giving it the Soto shuffle after your first home run, etc., etc. Again, a lot of what Jazz said, Miguel Rojas basically confirmed. So for me, I feel like that was really interesting. Clearly, Miggy Rowe and Jazz, the relationship was a struggle. It's extremely fractured now at this point. Miguel Rojas, he operated in a way that he knew and thought was best. And I think that's where it was coming from. But, I think Jazz found that a struggle, and it just created friction that just kept snowballing and snowballing. And then it got to a situation where you have this players' meeting, which Don Mattingly calls, and it ends up being a farce. And unfortunately for Miguel Rojas, he was the one that came out of it looking not the best, which was reported at the time. And at that point, the sense was his Marlins career and his Marlins days were numbered. I'm trying to speak properly. And that's how it played out. Skip rolled in. Skip recognized that for this team to be successful, it's going to be the production of Jazz Chisholm Jr. that's going to lead you there. And so, Jazz highlighted these issues. Surprise, surprise, Miggy Rowe traded. And it is what it is. So, long-winded summary. I think it's been a storyline that's connected to Locked On Marlins for many years. Clearly, myself and Craig Mish did pretty much the immediate episode after. Few people listened to that and didn't like what was being shared. Again, what was being shared should remain in the clubhouse, and you weren't there. But, after the years passed by, I think Craig Mish had it nailed on initially. And, the anger, the anger was there, not because of what happened, but it was the fact that people knew about it. That's why Miggy Rowe wants things to stay in the clubhouse, because unfortunately it was not his finest day. And that's at the heart of it for Miggy Rowe. The relationship with him and Jazz, fractured, always been fractured. The bullying went on, was what it was. We move on. We turn the page. Miggy Rowe's in with the Dodgers now, and he's on one of the best teams ever assembled. And, we'll see how they go. Jazz is a big part of this club. I'm going to talk about that straight after the next ad, because in my bold predictions, yes, you will be unsurprised to hear that Jazz Chisholm Jr. Is one of those. So before we do that, time to let you know about our good friends over at Gametime. Yes, sir. All right, guys. So, and this might be actually the perfect ad for this time of the year in particular. So, you shouldn't have to worry when you want to buy tickets to your next big event, even if it's last minute. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They have deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And with zone deals, you pick the section and Gametime picks the seats for big-time savings. And the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Can't say fairer than that. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, guys, back here with me, Peter Pratt, on Wednesday, the 27th of March, and it is opening day eve, baby. The Marlins have a 4-game series on deck against the Pirates. There will be a opening day series preview episode. It's a crossover with the host of Locked On Pirates as well, so watch out for that one that will drop tomorrow morning pretty early on, so you can get that in before the game starts. That's a fun episode. Fun episode and fun conversation. The Pirates, to me, could be a fun team. I think the series could be fun as well. And I'm absolutely got my eyeballs on Andrew McCutchen. He is 1 home run shy of 300 for his career. There are 4 lefties going for the Marlins. I mean, I can see 300 and I can see 301, maybe even 302 in this series. I can see Kutch having a big one. Anyway, more about that on tomorrow's episode. So we are in bold predictions time now. And these are a number of predictions that I'm going to put on tape, on the record, that we can reflect back on at the end of the year and consider how close or not they were. Most of these are player props, I think it's fair to say. So let's get it rolling. Let's start with, because these all link to the categories. Primarily, it's linked to categories and player performance. So I'm going to start with the bullpen. We're talking about the bullpen today. The Marlins have traded for Birch. I'm going to say that Birch is the... No, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that the saves leader for the Marlins will not be Tanner Scott. It will not be Andrew Nardi. It won't be Sixto Sanchez. Won't be any of them guys or Anthony Bender. It's going to be George Soriano. I think George Soriano finishes the year as the Marlins save leader. The number of saves will be less than 20. So I can certainly see Tanner Scott starting the year. I can absolutely see Tanner Scott being traded during the year. And then it comes down to who is performing and who deserves the opportunities. That could be Andrew Nardi. It could be Sixto Sanchez. It could be Anthony Bender. It could be a few guys. But for me, I've been really impressed with what I've seen with George Soriano, not just in spring, but last year too. I think there's a guy that can get high leverage outs out of the bullpen. And it wouldn't shock me if they end up trying to get a righty closer in sooner rather than later, particularly considering the way the rotation is made up at the current juncture, let's say. So that's it. Save leader, I'm going to say, is George Soriano, which probably at the start of the year, you would think he's maybe 7th or 8th most likely. So this is pretty bold, but I like George Soriano. Okay, let's stick with the pitching. And there's a guy here that I have been following very closely through this spring for various reasons. And he is on the opening day roster. He is in the opening day not the opening day rotation, but he's on, he's in the rotation to start the season. And I believe that this guy will lead the Marlins in pitching WAR in 2024. And it isn't going to be our opening day starter, Jesus Luzardo, although I think he will have a good year. It won't be AJ Puck. It won't be Trevor Rogers or Max Meyer. I believe that Ryan Weathers will lead the Marlins in the pitching WAR stat. Lead the pitchers in WAR. You know what I'm saying. Ryan Weathers. The reason for Ryan Weathers, I think he's going to throw the most innings, firstly. So there's an accumulation element here. So that's part of it. I also think that he's going to throw the most innings and near the top of the most quality innings as well. So there's a lot of young guys in this rotation. There's a lot of risk and there's a lot of upside. There's a lot of everything in this rotation, not just what's there for opening series, but on the IL too. There's a chance that, Braxton Garrett doesn't have the year he had last year. There's a chance that AJ Puck can't cut it as a starter. There's a chance that Max Meyer can only throw 100 innings. I think that's probably a high chance. So I look at the opportunities these guys are going to have, and I believe that Ryan Weathers will lead the Marlins pitching in WAR. Also, he could lead the Marlins generally in terms of the number of innings thrown. So that's a couple of pitching ones. They may feel pretty outlandish. Soriano as your save leader. Ryan Weathers as your WAR leader from the pitching side. Let's talk about some offensive dudes. Let's start with Jazz Chisholm Jr. Why not? Why not? For me, Jazz is going to be healthy this year. All year, in the main. We're going to have a full season of Jazz. 40 stolen bases, easily. May even be more. 40 stolen bags, 40 bombs. A 40-40 year for Jazz. MVP votes. I don't know how high the WAR will be, but I think Jazz 40-40 tracker is going to be nailed. The tracker will be going again, just in case you were wondering. So that one won't surprise you. I've spoken about that a few times. Let's talk about some others. Let's stay with home runs. Avisail Garcia is making this roster right now. We don't know how his year will go. We don't know how long he'll be with the Marlins. There's a lot of question marks. With that being said, I believe that Griffin Conine will have more home runs than Avisail Garcia for the Marlins in 2024. I don't believe that number will be more than 10. So I believe Conine will make his debut in 24, and he will hit at least one home run for the Marlins, probably in his first at-bat, maybe his first pitch, who knows. But Conine, for me, will end up with more home runs than Avisail Garcia in 2024. And there's a few reasons that could be. Primarily linked to Avisail Garcia, his performance, and if the performance is poor, he may not be here. Griffin Conine, for me, is a couple of injuries and some injuries and some out-of-form issues. He's a couple of moves away from being on this big league roster, and what we've seen in spring is, and what we've known for some time with Griffin Conine, that the power is real at this level, for sure. It's about making contact and quality contact, but if he does, we know it's going to disappear. And with the outfield mix right now, Dane Myers, Victor Mesa Jr., Avisail Garcia is one of those guys that could be in the outfield mix. I can see Griffin Conine definitely having some playing time, particularly maybe after the trade deadline. We'll see. It could be sooner than that. So Conine, more home runs than Avisail Garcia. The final one, it links to a guy that I just mentioned there as well, Dane Myers. I believe that Dane Myers will accrue more WAR, total WAR, whichever version you want to look at, doesn't matter. He's going to exceed Brian De La Cruz in WAR in 2024. Dane Myers will not be on the opening day roster. Brian De La Cruz will. So Brian De La Cruz will get a head start, seemingly. But I think I'm all in on the Dane train. I think I am. And I think Dane has a real opportunity here. There's a few caveats here, clearly, for Dane. I think that Nick Gordon equally is going to have a good year. So I like what I've seen from Nick Gordon. If I was going to say who could be the steals leader, I know I've got Jazz down for 40. There's a chance that Nick Gordon could exceed that. The question will be with Gordon is he playing left field or is he playing in the infield or whatever it might be? Nevertheless, I'm on the Dane train. I believe that he could exceed Brian De La Cruz in WAR in 2024. Primarily because WAR's not going to be amazing for De La Cruz. Clearly, with the stick in his hand and maybe runners on base ahead of him, that's kind of when Brian De La Cruz comes alive. But, base running's poor, fielding very poor. There could be a DH situation. So I could see Dane Myers accruing some, defensive WAR where Brian De La Cruz gets 0 or negative. Base running, probably a similar situation. So it may sound like a long shot, but I can absolutely see that happening. So just to summarize those, Soriano is your saves leader. Ryan Weathers with your pitching WAR leader. Jazz has a 40-40 campaign, gets some MVP votes. Conine hits more home runs than Avisail Garcia in 2024 for the Marlins. And Dane Myers has more WAR than Brian De La Cruz in 2024. Overall, my prediction for the Marlins is for this to be a pretty disappointing campaign. I'm an optimistic guy, but considering what the Marlins have done this offseason and what other clubs have done around them, it isn't just about what the Marlins have done, it's about what others have done. And you look around, and there's a lot of teams that have got a lot better. The Marlins have basically stood pat. They're starting the year with a ton of injuries on the pitching side. They're going to be tested early. There's going to be other guys that are going to go down. If Jesus Luzardo misses any time, this rotation is in serious trouble. It's already in trouble, to be honest with you. With Yuri Perez's situation, Edward Cabrera, we'll wait and see what the guys look like. But for me, the rotation is already in trouble. And if anything were to happen to Jesus Luzardo, then it would not be a good situation. Josh Bell, Tanner Scott, both on expiring deals. If they're nowhere near it, they'll be moved. There's a few other guys that could be moved. I look at this and think this is the offseason almost continuation. So I think when I look at the Marlins last year, their offense was really bad by the numbers in general. Their rotation was good and their bullpen was really good. I think the bullpen's got worse. And I think right now, heading into opening day, the pitching equally is worse. The offense has upside. It has upside. But some guys will underperform, some guys will get hurt, and a few will be better than maybe we anticipate. And that's kind of like the ebbs and flows. Maybe Jake Berger takes a step back. Maybe Luis Arias does. Maybe Jazz is healthy, though. It all balances out. Maybe Tim Anderson get it back. some guys are going to be better than we think. Some guys are going to be worse, and some guys are going to be on the injured list. Overall, it's probably going to net out where this offense doesn't take a massive step forward. I think the pitching is going to take a step backwards. And I think with all them one-run games, to me, everything points at the Marlins not being a 500 club in 2024. I hope I'm wrong, because last year was absolutely glorious. As a fan, as a podcaster, covering the team every day, it was the best Marlins season that I've ever had as a fan. 2020 was fun, but it wasn't as fun as 2023. So I'm absolutely hoping that I'm wrong on that situation. And by Craig Mish's counter, I am always wrong. So most likely the Marlins win 95 and beat the Braves out for the division at this point. But history tells me the Marlins last year, all the numbers tell me there was a lot of luck into that. And I feel like, considering what all the other clubs have done, the Marlins have basically stood pat and now got a load of injuries. To me, that says they're probably going to take quite a significant step backwards. Thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day, guys. Joining me on opening day eve, the Marlins start their campaign with a 4-game series at home against the Pittsburgh Pirates. They then have the Angels come into town as well, where Max Meyer will be getting the ball as well. So all eyes will be on that. I'm going to be dropping an episode tomorrow morning in advance of opening day. Equally, I'll likely be dropping a recap episode straight after game one. It's a UK-friendly time. Likely hit another episode then, recapping game one. What I would say from game ones, from my experience as a fan, it's been underwhelming. The reason it's underwhelming is you go ace versus ace, and the Marlins can absolutely hold up. Like Jesus Luzardo will likely hold up. But ace versus ace, normally the Marlins' below average offense is then exposed, and the other team typically wins. I think that's why. We'll see if that's what we actually see against the Pirates. We shouldn't be overly concerned about facing a Pirates team that, has been pretty underwhelming for multiple seasons, but they'll be looking to start hot. And don't forget, the Pirates were absolutely scorching to start the 2023 campaign. Look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow and all through the regular season. I'll see you soon.